The Edo people, also referred to as the Benin people, are an Edoid-speaking ethnic group. They are prominently native to 7 southern local government areas of Edo State, Nigeria. They are speakers of the Edo language and are the descendants of the founders of the Benin Kingdom, Ajiso Igodo. They are closely related to other Edoid ethnic groups, such as the Ezin, the Itsako, the Isoko, and Arobo, as well as other southern ethnic groups. The names Benin and Beni are Portuguese corruptions, ultimately from the word Ubini, which came into use during the reign of Oba ruler Uware, circa 1440. Ubini is an Edo word meaning livable, used by Pa Edu, the progenitor of the Edo state people, to describe the area found as a livable locale during their sojourn from Lower Egypt. Ubini was later corrupted to Beni by the mixed ethnicities living together at the center, and further corrupted to Benin around 1485, when the Portuguese began trade relations with Oba Uware, giving them coral beads, which the Edo people call ivory. Legendary origins. The Edo tradition of origin holds that initially there was no land on earth. Accordingly, Osinobwa requested 3 sons to descend from the sky in a canoe. One son, named Igodo, created land by pouring sand contained in a snail shell on the water, and Osinobwa made him king of Edo and of the world. Some traditions say Igodo was thought to have come from the sky due to his great wisdom. Ajiso hence means king from the sky. Early history. Relying on other traditions and archaeological evidence, historians believe that the Edo migrated into Igodagamado from the northeast in the second half of the 1st millennium CE, intermarrying with the local Ifa people and gradually assimilating them to their culture. Some traditions claim that they stayed temporarily at Ile-Ife before settling their present-day homeland. In Jacob Egarevba's first edition of A Short History of Benin 1934, he says the first Ajiso, Abagodo Igodo, was the eldest son of Odujawa. His second edition changed to have the Ajiso as having Odujawa. His second edition changed to have the Ajiso as having migrated from Egypt, likely influenced by the Hamitic hypothesis. The British Empire comprised the dominions, colonies, protectorates, mandates, and other territories ruled or administered by the United Kingdom and its predecessor states. It began with the overseas possessions and trading posts established by England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and colonization attempts by Scotland during the 17th century. At its height in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it became the largest empire in history and, for a century, was the foremost global power. By 1913, the British Empire held sway over 412 million people, 23% of the world population at the time, and by 1920, it covered 35.5 million square kilometers, 13.7 million square miles, 24% of the Earth's total land area. As a result, its constitutional, legal, linguistic, and cultural legacy is widespread. At the peak of its power, it was described as the empire on which the sun never sets, as the sun was always shining on at least one of its territories. During the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries, Portugal and Spain pioneered European exploration of the globe and in the process established large overseas empires. Envious of the great wealth these empires generated, England, France, and the Netherlands began to establish colonies and trade networks of their own in the Americas and Asia. A series of wars in the 17th and 18th centuries with the Netherlands and France left Britain the dominant colonial power in North America. Britain became a major power in the Indian subcontinent after the East India Company's conquest of Mughal Bengal at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The American War of Independence resulted in Britain losing some of its oldest and most populous colonies in North America by 1783. While retaining control of British North America, now Canada, and territories in and near the Caribbean and the British West Indies, British colonial expansion turned towards Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. After the defeat of France in the Napoleonic Wars 1803 to 1815, Britain emerged as the principal naval and imperial power of the 19th century and expanded its imperial holdings. It pursued trade concessions in China and Japan and territory in Southeast Asia. The Great Game and Scramble for Africa also ensued. The period of relative peace 1815 to 1914, during which the British Empire became the global hegemon, was later described as Pax Britannica, Latin for British peace. Alongside the formal control that Britain exerted over its colonies, its dominance of much of world trade and of its oceans meant that it effectively controlled the economies of and readily enforced its interests in many regions, such as Asia and Latin America. It also came to dominate the Middle East. Increasing degrees of autonomy were granted to its white settler colonies, some of which were formally reclassified as dominions by the 1920s. By the start of the 20th century, Germany and the United States had begun to challenge Britain's economic lead. Military, economic, and colonial tensions between Britain and Germany were major causes of the First World War, during which Britain relied heavily on its empire. The conflict placed enormous strain on its military, financial, and manpower resources. Although the empire achieved its largest territorial extent immediately after the First World War, Britain was no longer the world's preeminent industrial or military power. In the Second World War, Britain's colonies in East Asia and Southeast Asia were occupied by the Empire of Japan. Despite the final victory of Britain and its allies, the damage to British prestige and the British economy helped accelerate the decline of the empire. India, Britain's most valuable and populous possession, achieved independence in 1947 as part of a larger decolonization movement, in which Britain granted independence to most territories of the empire. The Suez Crisis of 1956 confirmed Britain's decline as a global power, and the handover of Hong Kong to China on July 1, 1997 symbolized for many the end of the British Empire, though 14 overseas territories that are remnants of the empire remain under British sovereignty. After independence, many former British colonies, along with most of the dominions, joined the Commonwealth of Nations, a free association of independent states. 15 of these, including the United Kingdom, retain the same person as monarch, currently King Charles III. The Ogiso were the earliest known ruling monarchy of the Edo Kingdom of Igbo-Magodo, founded by Igodo, the first Ogiso. The monarchy began around 900 AD and lasted until the early 12th century, when it was succeeded by the Oba monarchy. The Ogiso monarchy influenced the early socio-political structure of the region by introducing centralized governance and laying the foundations for the Benin Empire. Throughout its existence, the Ogiso monarchy had 31 rulers, and notable among them were Ogiso Igodo, the first ruler, and Ogiso heir, who implemented several administrative and cultural reforms. This era saw the establishment of settlements, the integration of various chiefdoms, and the growth of proto-urban centers, with Udo and Benin City being prominent examples. The decline of the Ogiso monarchy began with the rule of the last Ogiso, Owodo, whose reign was marked by internal conflict and public dissatisfaction. This led to his banishment and a period of interregnum, during which the nobleman Evian attempted to establish his own line of succession. However, the people eventually rejected this, inviting a prince from Ife to restore order, thus beginning the Oba monarchy. The legacy of the Ogiso monarchy remains in the cultural and historical consciousness of the Benin people, reflected in their traditions, folklore, and archaeological findings. Oremiyan, also known as Iranian, was a legendary Yoruba king from the Kingdom of Ife and the founder of the Benin Kingdom and the Oyo Empire. Although he was the youngest of the descendants of Oduduwa, he became the prime heir of Oduduwa upon his return to claim his grandfather's throne. According to early accounts, he founded Oyo as its first Alafin in the year 1300 shortly after establishing a new dynasty in Igbo-Magodo. Following Oremiyan's death, his family is fabled to have erected the commemorative stele known as the Staff of Oremiyan, Opa Oremiyan in the Yoruba language, at the place where their grandfather died. This obelisk is 5.5 m tall and about 1.2 m in circumference at its base. During a storm in 1884, about 1.2 m was broken off from its top, and it has fallen twice and been re-erected on each occasion. It currently stands in a grove in Mopa, Ile-Ife. Radiocarbon tests have shown that this royal marker was erected centuries before the start of the Oduduwa dynasty. Oduduwa or Ujua was a Yoruba divine king, a creator deity Orisha in the Yoruba religion, and the legendary figure who ushered in the classical period that later led to the foundation of the Ife Empire. His earthly origins are from the village of Oak Ora. According to tradition, he was the holder of the title of the Alafin of Ile-Ife, the Yoruba holy city. He ruled there briefly and also served as the progenitor of a number of independent royal dynasties in Yorubaland, with the praise names Olafin Adimula and Olafin I. Archaeologists and historians estimate Odujuwa's kingly existence to the late formative period of Ife 800-1000 CE, which aligns with indigenous Yoruba oral chronology. However, Yoruba religious adherents take it one step further, explaining spiritually Odujuwa, together with Obatala, are even seen to be aligned with creator divinities cloaked in human form as old as the earth itself, though the spiritual figure Odujuwa is often said to be distinct from the figure who reigned as Olafin. The etymological derivation of the Yoruba name Odujuwa is Odujuwa. This translates literally to the great repository which brings forth existence. Height of power. Uwere, also known as Uwere the Great or Uwere I, originally known as Prince Ogun, was the 12th Oba of the Benin Empire from 1440 until 1473. Uwere became king in a violent coup against his brother Uwafiakin, which destroyed much of Benin City. After the war, Uwere rebuilt much of the city of Benin, reformed political structures in the kingdom, greatly expanded the territory of the kingdom, and fostered the arts and festivals. He left a significant legacy in the Kingdom of Benin. Uwere was most likely born in the Benin Royal Palace in Benin City, and he wasn't proclaimed heir. Originally named Prince Ogun, he was an insignificant member of the royal house, even challenged from birth. Uwere's name means "the trouble has ceased," referring to when he finally gained the throne after rebelling against Uwafiakin. During his reign, Edo was rebuilt and possibly started the construction of the Benin moats. He was the founder of Benin's imperial era and expanded the Benin Empire in all directions. He was also the first Oba to meet the Portuguese in 1473. He was a key general and, from oral history, recounted 201 victories against other cities and states. Gaining power after seizing the throne from Uwafiakin in 1440, he reformed the administration of the Benin Empire and transformed it into an imperial state through conquest. He was the first Oba to establish limited trade with the Portuguese in 1473 and gradually began to acquire firearms for the empire. His early reforms and developments are seen as early acts of indigenous modernization in Africa. In 1440, Oba Uwere, also known as Uwere the Great, came to power and expanded the borders of the former city-state. It was only at this time that the administrative center of the kingdom began to be referred to as Ubenu after the Portuguese word and corrupted to Bini by the Itsekiri, Arobo, and Edo, who all lived together in the royal administrative center of the kingdom. The Portuguese who arrived in an expedition led by João Afonso de Aveiro in 1485 would refer to it as Benin, and the center would become known as Benin City. The Oba had become the mount of power within the region. In the 15th century, Oba Uwere is credited with turning Benin City into a city-state from a military fortress built by the Ajasos, protected by moats and walls. It was from this bastion that he launched his military campaigns and began the expansion of the kingdom from the Edo-speaking heartlands. Excavations also uncovered a rural network of earthen walls 6,000 to 13,000 kilometers, 4,000 to 8,000 miles long, that would have taken an estimated 150 million man-hours to build and must have taken hundreds of years to build. These were apparently raised to mark out territories for towns and cities. 13 years after Uwere's death, tales of Benin's splendors lured more Portuguese traders to the city gates. A series of walls marked the incremental growth of the city from 850 AD until its decline in the 16th century. To enclose his palace, he commanded the building of Benin's inner wall, an 11-kilometer-long 7-mile earthen rampart girded by a moat 6 m 20 feet deep. This was excavated in the early 1960s by Graham Kana. Kana estimated that its construction, if spread out over 5 dry seasons, would have required a workforce of 1,000 laborers working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Uwere also added great thoroughfares and erected 9 fortified gateways. Excavations at Benin City have revealed that it was already flourishing around 1200 to 1300 CE. Esigi, also spelt Osiagi, originally known as Osa, was the son of Oba Ozoliua, who reigned in the late 15th century, and his second wife, Queen Idia. He was the 16th Oba who ruled the medieval Benin Kingdom, now Benin City, Edo State, Nigeria from c. 1504 c. 1550. Works of art commissioned by Essegi are held in prominent museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum. After Ozolua's death, Essegi controlled Benin City, while his brother Arwarin controlled Udo, a town about 30 kilometers 20 miles northwest of Benin City that was nearly its equal in size and influence. Following a bitter power struggle with Arwarin, and with major assistance and support from his mother Idia, Essegi gathered the Benin army at Unuame on the river Asi, and from there launched an attack and overthrew Arwarin. Essegi became Oba of Benin and would later fend off an attack from the Igala people. Essegi started a tradition in Benin by abolishing the killing of the king's mother, giving Idia the title of Ioba or Queen Mother, and providing the Egwi Ioba Palace of the Queen Mother in Lower Uselu for her use. Idia was responsible for many cultural innovations that still hold strong in Benin's cultural history. She notably dressed as a man, marched alongside her son, and led Benin to victory in the Ida Battle of 1515. When Idia died, her protege and Essegi's wife Alaba would go to support the Oba until his death c. 1550. In the early 16th century, Oba Essegi expanded the kingdom eastwards, after defeating an invasion and attempted conquest of Benin by the Igala kingdom. Benin gained political strength and ascendancy over much of what is now Midwestern Nigeria. Its wealth grew through its extensive trade, especially with the interior of the region, although the trade with Europeans that developed from the late 15th century onwards in pepper, slaves, cloth, and ivory provided a smaller, additional supplement to Benin's wealth, its economy, its technology, and art. Rhineland brass manila bracelets, offered by Portuguese merchants for ivory, peppers, and slaves from 1507 AD, have been found to be the metallic base for the Benin Bronzes. A few of the cast plaques depict the Portuguese merchants, manillas, and the weapons offered as trade goods. A Benin bronze depicts a Portuguese merchant with brass manillas in the background. Benin ruled over the tribes of the Niger Delta, including the Western Igbo tribes, Ijaw, Itchikiri, Isoko, and Orobo, amongst others. It also held sway over the eastern Yoruba tribes of Ondo, Ekiti, Mahin/Ugbo, Hausa, Fulani, and Ijibu. At its height in the 16th century, Benin dominated trade along the entire coastline from the western Niger Delta, through Lagos reaching almost Accra in the west. Idia was the mother of Essegi, who reigned as Oba king of the Edo people from 1504 to 1550. Historians are uncertain as regards her period of life. They do know that Idia was alive during the Ida War 1515 to 1516 because she played a role that led to a great Benin victory. It has been argued that Idia, therefore, was the true power behind the throne of her son. She played a significant role in the rise and reign of the king, being described as a great warrior who fought relentlessly before and during her son's reign as the Oba king of the Edo people. Queen Idia was instrumental in securing the title of Oba for her son Essegi following the death of his father Oba Ozolua. To that end, she raised an army to fight off his brother Arwarin, who was supposed to be the Oba by right and tradition, but who was subsequently defeated in battle. Essegi's mother became the first Ioba of Benin. Idia first entered the royal household because Ozolua, the Oba from 1483 until 1514, saw her dance, and after the dance wanted to make her his wife. Idia and the Oba were married sometime before 1504, but historians are not positive about the exact date. As a result, Idia's parents helped prepare her for her future life in the palace by giving her certain medical herbs. She was known to be very intelligent because she was able to retrieve the throne for her son, and was also able to protect Essegi from his enemies such as Arwahin, Essegi's half-brother. Another interesting concept Idia was known for was her womb of Oryu, a phrase that meant that her womb defied the odds. These odds were that her son, Essegi, was not first in line for the throne, rather Essegi was originally third in line for the throne. In the end, and against the odds, Essegi became the Oba. Ajadogbo, the first in line for the throne as Oba, became an illegitimate candidate for the throne because he was crippled due to playing with his brothers, Aruahan and Essegi. The people of Benin thought that Idia had planned this because Idia was known to possess magical powers. This also shows how the people of Benin thought that she was able to both evade and create havoc. This resulted in Aruahan being next in line for the throne, but he saw Esigi as a threat. Consequently, Esigi wanted to assassinate his half-brother. Although, the only reason Aruanran did not assassinate his brother was because he knew that Esigi's mother, Idia, had the skill of magical arts, while Aruahan did not. There have been many representations of Queen Idia because she represented a key part of Benin's imperial courtly culture. Also, Idia was so influential because of her determination. Overall, she was described as a strong-willed, beautiful, intelligent, and wise woman. Esigi instituted the title of Ioba, mother of the monarch, and conferred it on his mother, along with the Egwi Ioba, palace of the Queen Mother. Queen Idia became more popular in contemporary Nigeria when it was decided that her face should be used as a sculpture to represent a Nigerian festival, Festac 77. The face of the Queen Mother came into the art world more after this. She was supposed to be killed after the crowning of her son as the Oba, according to the then tradition, but her son Esigi secretly took her to hide in a room that was to be entered by only those authorized to do so. He did this in order to protect her from being killed, and it worked until he was able to alter the tradition. After he canceled the law concerning royal matricide, Queen Idia returned freely to the palace and ruled together with her son, helping him fight spiritually and physically over his enemies, which helped him during his reign as Oba. Before she died, she trained her son's wife in her ways so her departure would be met unnoticed. The Kingdom of Benin, a West African legacy. Hidden in the heart of West Africa lies a forgotten empire that built walls longer than the Great Wall of China, crafted bronzes that stunned European invaders, and ruled with a power so feared, they tried to erase it from history. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire of power and art. Before Europe's rise, there was Benin, a kingdom of kings who ruled with divine right, artists who forged history in bronze, and warriors who defended their land with unmatched strategy. But what happened to this mighty kingdom? And why has so much of its legacy been stolen, hidden, or forgotten? Scroll, stay with us as we uncover secrets buried for centuries, challenge what you think you know about African history, and reveal why the story of Benin could change how we see the world forever. In the dense rainforests of West Africa lies the ghost of an empire so powerful, so advanced, it defied the expectations of the world. This was no village. This was a city of light, of law, of artistry, a place where kings ruled with divine authority, and their legacy was carved into metal, not myths. The Kingdom of Benin, founded over 1,000 years ago, was one of Africa's greatest civilizations. Its capital, Benin City, had streets lit by torches, a complex government system, and walls so vast they were once called the world's largest earthworks. European invaders didn't discover a primitive people. They discovered an empire that rivaled their own. But in 1897, that legacy was nearly erased. Benin was burned, its treasures stolen, its story twisted or forgotten. The world was shown a lie, that Africa had no history. Now, we rewrite the story. This isn't just about Benin. It's about power, culture, resistance, and truth. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire of power and art, and resistance. Scroll. In this video, we'll uncover how the Kingdom of Benin rose, ruled, and fell, and why its echoes still shake the world today. If you think you know history, think again. Mystery and discovery. Deep in the heart of West Africa, hidden beneath centuries of silence, lies the ghost of an empire. An empire of bronze, blood, and brilliance. They called it the Kingdom of Benin, a place of towering earthworks, sacred kings, and artists who shaped history into metal. This was not myth. This was real. Benin City, 13th century, present-day Nigeria. And yet, few have heard of it. Fewer still understand what was lost when its capital burned in 1897. Power and sophistication. Long before the rise of European colonial empires, Benin was already a metropolis, organized, defended, alive. Its kings, known as Obas, ruled through divine right, protected by warriors, and advised by powerful guilds. The people of Benin mastered governance, engineering, and above all, art. The famed Benin Bronzes weren't mere decorations. They were royal records, visual testaments to generations of history, identity, and pride. So advanced were these works that when British soldiers first laid eyes on them, they refused to believe they were made by Africans. In 1897, British forces stormed Benin City in retaliation for a diplomatic incident. What followed was not justice, it was devastation. The city was looted. The Oba was exiled. Thousands of priceless artifacts were stolen and scattered across the globe. What couldn't be stolen was burned. An entire civilization reduced to ash and buried under colonial lies. But the story of Benin is not over. It lives on, in the memory of its people, in the fire of its artists, and in the demand for truth. Today, a new generation is reclaiming the legacy. The walls are rising again. The bronzes are finding their way home. And the world is beginning to ask, what else did we ignore or erase? This is not just African history. This is world history. And it's time we told it right. The Kingdom of Benin, a powerful pre-colonial West African state, flourished for centuries. It was renowned for its sophisticated bronze and ivory artistry, a testament to its advanced civilization and rich culture. Enduring heritage. Its intricate artworks, like the famous Benin Bronzes, continue to educate and inspire. This enduring heritage preserves a vital piece of African history and cultural identity. The Kingdom of Benin, or Empire of Benin, also known as Great Benin, is a traditional kingdom in southern Nigeria. It has no historical relation to the modern Republic of Benin, which was known as Dahomey from the 17th century until 1975. The Kingdom of Benin's capital was Edo, now known as Benin City in Edo State, Nigeria. The Benin Kingdom was one of the oldest and most developed states in the coastal hinterland of West Africa. It grew out of the previous Edo Kingdom of Ighodamagodo around the 11th century AD. It was annexed by the British Empire in 1897, but endured as a non-sovereign monarchy. West Africa, also known as Western Africa, is the westernmost region of Africa. The United Nations defines Western Africa as the 16 countries of Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Togo, as well as St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha United Kingdom Overseas Territory. The population of West Africa is estimated at around 419 million people as of 2021 and at 381,981,000 as of 2017, of which 189,672,000 were female and 192,309,000 male. The region is demographically and economically one of the fastest growing on the African continent. Early history in West Africa includes a number of prominent regional powers that dominated different parts of both the coastal and internal trade networks, such as the Mali and Gao empires. West Africa sat at the intersection of trade routes between Arab-dominated North Africa and further south on the continent, the source of specialized goods such as gold, advanced ironworking, and ivory. After European exploration encountered rich local economies and kingdoms, the Atlantic slave trade built on already existing slave systems to provide labor for colonies in the Americas. After the end of the slave trade in the early 19th century, European nations, especially France and Britain, continued to exploit the region through colonial relationships. For example, they continued exporting a number of extractive goods, including labor-intensive agricultural crops like cocoa and coffee, forestry products like tropical timber, and mineral resources like gold. Since independence, many West African countries, such as the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, have played important roles in the regional and global economies. West Africa has a rich ecology, with strong biodiversity and several distinct regions. The area's climate and ecology are heavily influenced by the dry Sahara to the north and east, which provides dry winds during the Harmattan, as well as the Atlantic Ocean to the south and west, which provides seasonal monsoons. This mixture of climates gives West Africa a rich and diverse array of biomes, from biodiversity-rich tropical forests to drylands supporting rare and endangered fauna such as pangolins, rhinoceros, and elephants. Because of the pressure for economic development, many of these ecologies are threatened by processes like deforestation, biodiversity loss, overfishing, pollution from mining, plastics and other industries, and extreme changes resulting from climate change in West Africa. Nigeria, officially the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is a country in West Africa. It is situated between the Sahel to the north and the Gulf of Guinea in the Atlantic Ocean to the south. It covers an area of 923,769 square kilometers and 356,669 square miles. With a population of more than 230 million, it is the most populous country in Africa and the world's sixth most populous country. Nigeria borders Niger in the north, Chad in the northeast, Cameroon in the east, and Benin in the west. Nigeria is a federal republic comprising 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, where its capital, Abuja, is located. The largest city in Nigeria by population is Lagos, one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world and the largest in Africa. Nigeria has been home to several indigenous material cultures, pre-colonial states and kingdoms since the 2nd millennium BC. The Nok culture, c. 1500 BC, marks one of the earliest known civilizations in the region. The Hausa kingdoms inhabited the north, with the Edo Kingdom of Benin in the south and Igbo Kingdom of Nri in the southeast. In the southwest, the Yoruba Ife Empire was succeeded by the Oyo Empire. The present-day territory of Nigeria was home to a vast array of city-states. In the early 19th century, the Fula Jihads culminated in the Sokoto Caliphate. The modern state originated with British colonization in the 19th century, taking its present territorial shape with the merging of the Southern Nigeria Protectorate and the Northern Nigeria Protectorate in 1914. The British set up administrative and legal structures and incorporated traditional monarchs as a form of indirect rule. Nigeria became a formally independent federation on October 1, 1960. It experienced a civil war from 1967 to 1970, followed by a succession of military dictatorships and democratically elected civilian governments until achieving a stable government in the 1999 Nigerian presidential election. Nigeria is a multinational state inhabited by more than 250 ethnic groups speaking 500 distinct languages, all identifying with a wide variety of cultures. The three largest ethnic groups are the Hausa in the north, Yoruba in the west, and Igbo in the east, together constituting over 60% of the total population. The official language is English, chosen to facilitate linguistic unity at the national level. Nigeria's constitution ensures de jure freedom of religion, and it is home to some of the world's largest Muslim and Christian populations. Nigeria is divided roughly in half between Muslims who live mostly in the north part of the country and Christians, who live mostly in the south. Indigenous religions such as those native to the Igbo and Yoruba ethnicities are in the minority. Nigeria is a regional power in Africa and a middle power in international affairs. Nigeria's economy is the fourth largest in Africa, the 53rd largest in the world by nominal GDP, and 27th largest by PPP. Nigeria is often referred to as the Giant of Africa by its citizens due to its large population and economy, and is considered to be an emerging market by the World Bank. Nigeria is a founding member of the African Union and a member of many international organizations, including the United Nations, the Commonwealth of Nations, NEM, the Economic Community of West African States, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and OPEC. It is also a member of the Informal Mint Group of countries and is one of the next 11 economies. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the empire reached the height of its prosperity, expanding its territory, trading with European powers, and creating a remarkable artistic legacy in cast bronze, iron, brass, carved ivory, and other materials. By the 1st century BC, the Benin territory was partially agricultural, and it became primarily agricultural by around AD 500, but hunting and gathering of animals still remained important. Also by AD 500, iron was in use by the inhabitants of the Benin territory. Benin City, formerly Edo, sprang up by around AD 1000 and was located in a forest that could be easily defended. The dense vegetation and narrow paths made the city easy to defend against attacks. The rainforest helped in the development of the city because of its vast resources that could be exploited: fish from rivers and creeks, animals to hunt, leaves for roofing, plants for medicine, ivory for carving and trading, and wood for boat building. However, domesticated animals could not survive due to a disease spread by tsetse flies. After centuries of exposure, some animals, such as cattle and goats, developed a resistance to the disease. The earliest organized polity in the region that would become Benin was Igodomagodo, which coalesced from existing autonomous communities in the late 1st millennium CE. The ruler was called Ajiso, the ruler of the sky. The Ijiso were responsible for putting in place many of the cultural and social traditions that have shaped Benin up to the present. Around the 13th century CE, Ajiso Owodo was overthrown by the people of Benin after a tumultuous and incompetent reign. In his place, they chose Evian, a popular and powerful Ajifa, earth priest and chief of the local Ifa people, as Okivbo, or head of state. Evian's later attempt to pass power to his son Ojiamwin, thereby creating a new royal dynasty, was resisted. The Edianevbo ruling council of chiefs refused to sanction the move and sent emissaries requesting that a prince of Isle Ife restore order and legitimacy to their throne. Historical traditions in Benin diverge on the details of these events. The official tradition records that Oranmian, son of Odujawa, accepted the council's invitation. His arrival marked the beginning of the new dynasty and the establishment of the title Oba for the rulers of Benin. This version serves as a stock narrative used by the leaders of the Ife Empire to explain and justify the expansion of their cultural and economic sphere of influence into Igodomagodo during this period. Another tradition, first recorded in the 1970s, provides a different story. While several versions exist, they all argue that the founding Oba was not a Yoruba, but was instead the son or grandson of Ajiso Owodo, natives of Benin who were in exile in Ife. Some go further, claiming that Owodo's son Ekalaterhan and Odujawa are the same person, and therefore that the Edo were responsible for the foundation or organization of Ife. Historians generally see these alternative accounts as recent inventions or distortions of older historical traditions in response to the dynamics of modern Nigerian society. Whether he was ethnically Yoruba or the son of an Edo exile, Oramian's claim to the throne was not universally acknowledged. Ojiamwin, son of Evian, had many supporters in the Ifa wards of the city and likely held power when Oramian arrived. A battle ensued between the two sides, with the newcomers, supported by the Edianevbo, managing to enter the city. Despite his victory, Oramian struggled to master the complex politics of the divided kingdom, particularly since he was a foreigner. He married Aranwind, daughter of a local chief, and they had a son Yuka. Exasperated and desiring to rule in Isle Ife, Oramian abdicated the throne of Benin in favor of his son, saying that only a native could rule effectively. Yuka was crowned the first Oba of Benin, using special regalia sent by his father from Ife, and several local chiefs were appointed to help the young king rule. The Kingdom of Dahomey was a West African kingdom located within present-day Benin that existed from approximately 1600 until 1904. It developed on the Abumi Plateau amongst the Fon people in the early 17th century and became a regional power in the 18th century by expanding south to conquer key cities like Wida belonging to the Kingdom of Wida on the Atlantic coast, which granted it unhindered access to the tricontinental Atlantic slave trade. For much of the middle 19th century, the Kingdom of Dahomey became a key regional state, after eventually ending tributary status to the Oyo Empire. European visitors extensively documented the kingdom, and it became one of the most familiar African nations known to Europeans. The Kingdom of Dahomey was an important regional power that had an organized domestic economy built on conquest and slave labor. Significant international trade and diplomatic relations with Europeans, a centralized administration, taxation systems, and an organized military. Notable in the kingdom were significant artwork, an all-female military unit called the Dahomey Amazons by European observers, and the elaborate religious practices of Vodun. The growth of Dahomey coincided with the growth of the Atlantic slave trade, and it became known to Europeans as a major supplier of slaves. Dahomey was a highly militaristic society constantly organized for warfare. It captured captives during wars and raids against neighboring societies and sold them into the Atlantic slave trade in exchange for European goods such as rifles, gunpowder, fabrics, cowrie shells, tobacco, pipes, and alcohol. Other captives became slaves in Dahomey, where they worked on royal plantations or were killed in human sacrifices during the festival celebrations known as the annual customs of Dahomey. The annual customs of Dahomey involved significant collection and distribution of gifts and tribute, religious voting ceremonies, military parades, and discussions by dignitaries about the future for the kingdom. In the 1840s, Dahomey began to face decline with British pressure to abolish the slave trade, which included the anti-slavery blockade of Africa by the Royal Navy's West Africa Squadron. Dahomey was also weakened after facing crushing defeats at the hands of Abeokuta, a Yoruba city-state which was founded by the Oyo Empire refugees migrating southward. Dahomey later began experiencing territorial disputes with France, which led to the war in 1890 and part of the kingdom becoming a French protectorate. The kingdom fell 4 years later, when renewed fighting resulted in the last king, Bihanzin, to be overthrown and the country annexed into French West Africa. French Dahomey would gain independence in 1960 as the Republic of Dahomey, which would rename itself Benin in 1975. Edo, officially known as Edo State, is a state in the south-south geopolitical zone of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. As of 2024, the state was ranked as the 20th most populous state, 5,250,000 in Nigeria. The estimated state population is around 4,777,000 in 2021. Edo State is the 21st largest state by landmass in Nigeria. The state's capital and largest city, Benin City, is the 4th largest city in Nigeria and the center of the country's rubber industry. Created in 1991 from the former Bendel State, it is also known as the heartbeat of the nation. Edo State borders Kogi State to the north for 133 kilometers and across the Niger River for 81 kilometers to the northeast, and Anambra State to the east for about 4 km across the Niger River, Delta State to the southeast and south for 350 kilometers, 218 miles, and Ondo State to the west. The modern borders of Edo State encompass regions that were formerly the site of various empires and kingdoms of the Second Dynasty formed in the 11th century AD, the Benin Empire. The ancient city of Edo, the site of modern-day Benin City, was home to some of the largest earthworks in the world. In 1897, the British Empire conducted a punitive expedition of the region, destroying most of the ancient city of Edo and incorporating the territory into what would become the Southern Nigeria Protectorate. Edo State is a diverse state that is predominantly inhabited by the Edoid people, including the Edo or Bini, Ezin, Ora, Akoko-Edo, Ija-Awan, and Afamai people, and Igala people among others. The most common Edoid language spoken is the Edo language, which is commonly spoken in Benin City. Christianity is the dominant religion in Edo State. It was first introduced to the region by Portuguese missionaries during the 15th century. Islam and traditional religions are also practiced. Benin Ivory Mask. The Benin Ivory Mask is a miniature sculptural portrait in ivory of Idia, the first Ioba, Queen Mother, of the 16th century Benin Empire, taking the form of a traditional African mask. The masks were looted by the British from the palace of the Oba of Benin in the Benin Expedition of 1897. Two almost identical masks are kept at the British Museum in London and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Both feature a serene face of the Queen Mother wearing a beaded headdress, a beaded choker at her neck, scarification highlighted by iron inlay on the forehead, all framed by the flange of an openwork tiara and collar of symbolic beings, as well as double loops at each side for attachment of the pendant. Until its restitution in 2022 to Nigeria, the Linden Museum in Germany had such a mask in its collection. Further, there are also similar masks at the Seattle Art Museum and one in a private collection. The British Museum example in particular has also become a cultural emblem of modern Nigeria since Festac 77, a major Pan-African cultural festival held in Lagos, Nigeria in 1977, which chose as its official emblem a replica of the mask crafted by Herbert Imokpe. Benin Empire. In the early 16th century, the dynamic Esseji ruled the Benin Empire of the Edo people as its Oba. He came to power as Portuguese explorers first made contact with the empire. The empire traded pepper, ivory, local textiles, and slaves for brass and coral beads. Esseji engaged in two major conflicts. First, his half-brother fought a protracted civil war over the line of succession that would crown Esseji, the firstborn. Second, Esseji successfully defended against an invasion from the northern Igala kingdom and captured their leader. Esseji rewarded his key political and mystical advisor during these trials, his mother Idia, with the title of Ioba, Queen Mother, the first in a tradition of Queen Mother advisors. The identification with Idio was made by Oba Akinzua II in the mid-20th century. Ritual use. The Oba of Benin commissioned works from his guild of ivory and wood carvers, the Igbasamwan. Their works were customized for their ruler, between the material connotations of ivory and the visual motifs in the carvings. At least two of the masks feature Portuguese imagery, although this imagery outlasted the actual Portuguese presence, and thus were likely created during Esaji's early 16th century rule, possibly c. 1520, either during Idia's life or soon after her death. The similarities between the masks indicate that they were likely created at the same time by the same artist. Their details match the comparable carving qualities of ivory spoons and salt cellars commissioned during the same period. The early period of Benin art, the phase of strongest affiliation with Ife or Yoruba art. Ivory works from Benin were mainly for the Oba to use in ritual. The masks may have been used in ceremonies including the Uji Ioba commemoration of the Oba's mother, as well the Imobo purification ceremony to expel bad spirits from the land. Similar pendant masks are mainly used in contemporary Imobo ceremonies focused on bad spirits, though the traditions of Imobo may have changed throughout history. For rungs on the side of the masks, above and below each ear, let the masks hang in suspension and indicate that the masks were suspended from a cord, though experts have disagreed on how they were worn. British Museum art historian William Fagg concluded that unlike the small brass pendant masks worn at the waist by modern kings, the ivory mask was likely worn around the neck. An 1830s drawing of a similar mask worn at the breast by a neighboring ruler confirms Fagg's theory. Based on the position of the rungs, Metropolitan curator Elisa Lagema also affirmed the theory. Benin specialist and anthropologist Paula Benamis, however, wrote that the masks were worn on the waist as pendants during the Uji Ioba and Imobo ceremonies. The hollow masks likely served as amuletic containers. Below the mask's collars, the rings of small loops are attachment points for crotal bells. Civil War. Ruling in the late 16th century, Oba Ihangbudo was the last of the warrior kings. After his reign, the empire gradually shrank in size, losing control over territories in the west. The end of his reign saw a rise in the power of prominent officials, and during the following decades many Obas enjoyed short and turbulent reigns as various branches of the royal family fought for position. The death of Oba Awan in 1641 may have marked the end of the direct father-to-son line of succession going back to Yuka. Officials also increasingly controlled the military and trade, as cloth came to replace the previously dominant pepper and ivory as trade commodities. A civil war broke out around 1689, around the time that Oba Uwak ascended to the throne. Ias Ode and lower-ranked members of the royal administration revolted against their superiors' attempts to control them. The Oba brought in troops from another city, but could not defeat the rebels, and Benin City was sacked. The war continued for roughly 10 years before negotiations brought them to an end. Uwak's succession, however, was disputed between his two sons Ozweir and Akinzua. Akinzua and his close ally, a traditional chief who bore the title Azomo, eventually prevailed over the younger Ozweir and his ally, the Ias Ode, in a decisive battle in 1721. Cleanup and reconquest of rebel areas, however, took another 10 years. With renewed stability in the kingdom, Oba Akinzua benefited from trade with Europeans and was to be one of the richest Obas in the kingdom's history. Yuka I, reigned 1200 AD, 1235 AD, was the first Oba of Benin and presided over the kingdom's shift from the Ajiso monarchy to the establishment of the Obaship. His 35-year reign had a notable impact on the political, cultural, and traditional aspects of the kingdom. Before Yuka I's rule, the Benin kingdom faced uncertainty due to the banishment of Owodo, the last Ajiso, for misrule. Odujawa, who was the father of Oromian, had been exiled to Uhi, Ife, which eventually set the stage for Yuka I's ascension to power. The turning point occurred when Odujawa sent his son, Oromian, to Benin as an emissary. Oromian's arrival was met with resistance, leading to his settlement in Usama, on the outskirts of Benin City. To gauge the loyalty of the Benin people, Oromian challenged them to care for a common louse for 3 years, symbolizing their commitment to their potential king. Oromian resided in a palace constructed for him within the city of Benin. During his time there, he entered into matrimony with an Edo woman by the name of Aaron Wind. Their union bore fruit in the form of a son, who was christened Yuka. Despite the successful completion of this task by the Benin people, Oromian recognized the importance of a ruler deeply rooted in Benin culture. He relinquished his claim to the throne, highlighting the need for a monarch well-versed in Benin traditions, ultimately paving the way for Yuka I's reign. Yuka I's rule marked the establishment of the Obaship in Benin, with the term Oba beginning to signify kingship during his time. He emphasized the significance of rulers educated in Benin culture, a principle that persisted over the centuries. Following Yuka I's death in 1235 AD, his legacy became an integral part of the Benin kingdom's identity, influencing its governance, traditions, and cultural heritage. Britain seeks control over trade. Benin's economy was thriving in the early to mid-19th century with the development of the trade in palm oil and the continuation of the trade in textiles, ivory, and other resources. To preserve the kingdom's independence, the Oba gradually banned the export of goods from Benin until the trade was exclusively in palm oil. By the latter half of the 19th century, Britain desired a closer relationship with the Kingdom of Benin, as British officials were increasingly interested in controlling trade in the area and in accessing the kingdom's palm oil, kola nut, ivory, and potentially rubber resources, following the introduction of Hevea brasiliensis saplings via Kew Gardens in 1895. Several attempts were made to achieve this, beginning with the official visit of Richard Francis Burton in 1862 when he was consul at Fernandope. Following that came attempts to establish a treaty between Benin and the United Kingdom by Hewitt, Blair, and Annesley in 1884, 1885, and 1886 respectively. However, these efforts did not yield any results. The kingdom resisted becoming a British protectorate throughout the 1880s, but the British remained persistent. Progress was made in 1892 during the visit of Vice-Consul Henry Galway. This mission was the first official visit after Burton's. Moreover, it would also set in motion the events to come that would lead to Oba Oven Ramwen's fall from power. The Galway Treaty of 1892. In the late 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin managed to retain its independence, and the Oba exercised a monopoly over trade, which British merchants in the region found irksome. The territory was coveted by an influential group of investors for its rich natural resources, such as palm oil and ivory. After British consul Richard Burton visited Benin in 1862, he wrote of Benin's as a place of gratuitous barbarity which stinks of death, a narrative which was publicized in Britain and increased support for the territory's colonization. In spite of this, the kingdom maintained its independence and was not visited by another representative of Britain until 1892 when Henry Galway, the British vice-consul of the Oil Rivers Protectorate, later the Niger Coast Protectorate, visited Benin City hoping to open up trade and ultimately annex Benin Kingdom and transform it into a British protectorate. Galway was able to get Omo and Oba, Oven Ramwen, and his chiefs to sign a treaty which gave Britain legal justification for exerting greater influence over the empire. While the treaty itself contains text suggesting Oven Ramwen sought Benin to become a protectorate, this was contrasted by Galway's own account, which suggests the Oba was hesitant to sign the treaty. Although some suggest that humanitarian motivations were driving Britain's actions, letters written between colonial administrators suggest that economic motivations were predominant. The treaty itself does not explicitly mention anything about Benin's bloody customs that Burton had written about, and instead only includes a vague clause about ensuring the general progress of civilization. Oven Ramwen. Oba Oven Ramwen Nagbesai, also called Overami, was the 35th Oba of the Kingdom of Benin reigning from c. 1888, c. 1897, up until the British Punitive Expedition. Born circa 1857, he was the son of Oba Adolo. He took the name Oven Ramwen Nagbesai at his enthronement in 1888. Every Oba took a new name at his coronation, Oven Ramwen meaning the rising sun, and Nagbesai meaning which spreads over all. At the end of the 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin had managed to retain its independence, and the Oba exercised a monopoly over trade which the British found irksome. The territory was coveted by an influential group of investors for its rich natural resources such as palm oil, rubber, and ivory. However, Slavery played a critical role in the rise of Benin, with Oba Oven Ramwan Nagbasai representing the pinnacle of the kingdom's human exploitation. The kingdom was largely independent of British control, and pressure continued from figures such as Vice-Consul James Robert Phillips and Captain Henry Galway, the British Vice-Consul of Oil Rivers Protectorate, who were pushing for British annexation of the Benin Empire and the removal of the Oba. The Massacre of 1897. A British delegation departed from the Oil Rivers Protectorate in 1897 with the stated aim of negotiating with the Oba of Benin regarding the trade agreement, which they felt he was not keeping. The leader of the delegation, James Robert Phillips, had asked his superiors in the British Foreign Office for permission to lead an armed British expedition to depose the Oba of Benin not long before the expedition, but left for Benin City with a diplomatic delegation, or a reconnaissance mission disguised as a peaceful diplomatic delegation, before receiving a reply to his request. Perceiving this to be an attempt to depose the Oba's generals unilaterally ordered an attack on the delegation as it was approaching Benin City, which included 8 unknowing British representatives and hundreds of African porters and laborers, all but 2 of whom were killed. A punitive expedition was launched in response, and a 1,200-men-strong force, under the command of Sir Harry Rawson, captured Benin City. They deliberately sought out and destroyed certain areas of the city, including those thought to belong to the chiefs responsible for the ambush of the British delegation, and in the process of fire burnt the palace and surrounding quarters, which the British claimed was accidental. There is much debate of why James Phillips set out on the mission to Benin without much weaponry. Some have argued he was going on a peaceful mission. Such commentators argue that the message from the Oba that his festival would not permit him to receive European visitors touched the humanitarian side of Phillips's character because of an incorrect assumption that the festival included human sacrifice. Igbafe also points to Phillips' November 1896 advocacy of military force regarding Benin, arguing that this is inconsistent with the perception of Phillips as a man of peace in January 1897. Igbafe posits that Phillips was going on a reconnaissance mission and that Phillips' haste to Benin can be explained by a belief that nothing bad would happen to him or his party. The expeditionary force also took the palace art as war booty. The looted portrait figures, busts, and groups created in iron, carved ivory, and especially in brass, conventionally termed the Benin Bronzes, were sold off to defray the cost of the expedition, and some were accessioned to the British Museum. Most were sold elsewhere and are now on display in various museums around the world. Post-1897. The British occupied Benin, which was absorbed into the British Niger Coast Protectorate and eventually into British colonial Nigeria. A general emancipation of slaves followed in the wake of British occupation, but Britain also imposed a system of forced labor in Benin and in surrounding areas, as they did throughout other parts of southern Nigeria. The British launched an additional operation in 1899 called the Benin Territories Expedition against rebels still holding out against the British. The British burnt down numerous towns and destroyed farms in an attempt to starve the rebels into submission. After the 1899 expedition, military resistance in the former Kingdom of Benin against the British occupation ceased. Oba Oven Ramwan died in exile in Calabar in January 1914. His son Aguo Basinwin was enthroned as Oba on July 24, taking the regnal name Yucatu. His coronation coincided with a shift in British policy towards indirect rule, and so he was allowed to return to Benin. Yucatu rebuilt the royal palace, which had been destroyed in 1897. He also re-established the traditional officers of the kingdom, restored the craft guilds, commissioned objects to replace those looted by the British, and started the Benin Arts and Crafts School. Yucatu's rule marked Benin's transition to a non-sovereign monarchy within first colonial and then independent Nigeria. His successors have played important roles mediating political disputes and working towards the return of the looted Benin Bronzes. In March 2021, institutions in Berlin, Germany, and Aberdeen, Scotland announced decisions to return Benin Bronzes in their possession to their place of origin. Ozoliua, originally known as Prince Okpame, was the 15th Oba of the Kingdom of Benin who reigned from c. 1483 AD, c. 1504 AD. He greatly expanded the kingdom through warfare and increased contact with the Portuguese Empire. and was later called Ozoliwa Inabaromi, meaning Ozoliwa the Conqueror in Edo. He was an important Oba in the history of the Kingdom of Benin and retains importance in the folklore and celebrations of the region. Prince Okpame was the third and the youngest son of Uware, who had significantly expanded the Kingdom of Benin during his reign from 1440 until 1473. Following the death of Uware, his eldest surviving son, Esi, was assassinated by a poison arrow at his coronation, and his second oldest son, Olua, ruled with significant domestic descent for 7 years. After a short-lived rule of the kingdom by a collection of chieftains, Prince Okpame was named the Oba in 1483 after a 3-year interregnum and took the name Ozoliwa. His rule was defined largely by significant military expansion of the Kingdom of Benin. This included a successful attack against the Kingdom of Owo. While historical accounts of the battle differ, the result left Owo with its independence while still requiring that it pay tribute to Benin. In diplomatic exchanges with the Portuguese, he claimed to have been victorious in over 200 battles. These victories earned him the title Ozoliwa Inabarmoy, meaning Ozoliwa the Conqueror in Edo, and in statues and artwork he is often displayed as a great warrior. It is difficult to date the alleged migrations from Benin, but there is a strong belief that the founder of Ora was a son of Oba Ozoliwa, who was reigning in 1485. The founders of several other tribes are said to have come at the same time, although limited trade and contact with the Portuguese had begun under his father Uware. The contact expanded significantly under Ozoliwa, with Portuguese explorer John Alfonso de Aveiro entering the capital Benin City in 1485 and accompanying Ozoliwa, although not participating in war. Ozoliwa was intrigued by the possibilities of firearms for expansion of the kingdom, but was informed by de Aveiro that firearm trade was only possible with Christian allies of the Portuguese. As a result, Ozoliwa sent an ambassador to Portugal in the early 1500s to propose missionary activity in the kingdom and a royal conversion to Christianity in exchange for trade in firearms. At least one source indicates that he himself went to Portugal at some point. The Portuguese did not agree, but did send a group of missionaries to the kingdom in 1514. The missionaries soon left, as the kingdom was not interested in Christianity unless this was coupled to the facilitation of trade in firearms. Esigi, also spelt Osiaji, originally known as Osa, was the son of Oba Ozoliwa, who reigned in the late 15th century, and his second wife, Queen Idia. He was the 16th Oba who ruled the medieval Benin Kingdom, now Benin City, Edo State, Nigeria from c. 1504 c. 1550. Works of art commissioned by Esigi are held in prominent museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum. After Ozoliwa's death, Esigi controlled Benin City, while his brother Arwaran controlled Udo, a town about 30 kilometers, 20 miles, northwest of Benin City that was nearly its equal in size and influence. Following a bitter power struggle with Arwaran, and with major assistance and support from his mother Idia, Esigi gathered the Benin army at Unuame on the river Asi, and from there launched an attack and overthrew Arwaran. Esigi became Oba of Benin and would later fend off an attack from the Igala people. Esigi started a tradition in Benin by abolishing the killing of the king's mother, giving Idia the title of Ioba, or Queen Mother, and providing the Egwi Ioba, Palace of the Queen Mother, in Lower Usalu for her use. Idia was responsible for many cultural innovations that still hold strong in Benin's cultural history. She notably dressed as a man marched alongside her son and led Benin to victory in the Ida Battle of 1515. When Idia died, her protege and Esigi's wife Alaba would go to support the Oba until his death c. 1550. Emotin, FL 1440 to 1473, was a market woman who traded in foodstuffs around the Oba market in the ancient Benin Kingdom during the reign of Oba Uwafiakan and Prince Ogun, who later took the name Oba Uware the Great after becoming the Oba of Benin. She is the pioneer of the first daycare center in Benin City. Oral history said she assisted Oba Uware in reclaiming the throne as Oba of Benin after several years in exile. Emotin, real name Uware, was born in Ayan between 1380 and 1400. After the death of her husband, she constructed a hut where she attended to the needs of children. Emoton was instrumental in Uware's reclaiming the throne as Oba of Benin after she told him of a murder plot against him made by Uwafiakin and some chiefs during his time in exile. Uware went on to appoint Emoton as the Ieki English leader of the authorized Ikpate Guild, a position given to someone with the task of enforcing market rules and checkmating security matters.